Your report highlights a persistent voter representation gap, as you put it. Voters of color who are not represented in the samples that drive national and swing state polls that we all rely on. With that said, what are we missing in the polls that we're describing?
Sure. And really the voter representation gap that we're discussing is about actually representation at the ballot box, those that are casting a ballot in any given election. And we expect in 2024 as well that voters of color will be a smaller share of actual voters casting a ballot than their share of the eligible voter population, a representation gap. That being said, we've had a lot of reasons to be encouraged about the potential for mobilization and the impact that voters of color can have on this election, which I'm happy to talk about. But just in terms of polling, certainly it's nothing new that polling samples often are not sufficient. The methodology around polls to accurately understand where voters of color and other smaller demographic groups potentially, right, what their thinking is around the election, whether they're going to vote, but how they feel about issues and certainly how they feel about the horse race itself. And that leads to a lot of misinformation or at least misunderstanding about their potential impact actually come November.
So just to be clear, Mindy, if we want to think about their actual impact, the focus we should be putting on maybe the small sample sizes, is there enthusiasm around actually turning out to cast a ballot? Is that really more decisive here than their passion on any particular issue?
Well, enthusiasm is huge in politics, period. I'll say when it comes to issues, really probably the most important thing to remember is typically the top issues for Black voters, for Latino voters, Asian American voters are going to mirror, by and large, the top issues for everybody else. The difference maybe is in emphasis, right, and saliency, and how that might impact somebody's individual vote. That can vary across groups. The intensity, what somebody feels about the economic situation, right, that they're experiencing in their home and in their state. But when we talk about Latino issues, when we talk about Black or Asian American issues, they are issues that everyone cares about. Where the difference can come in for candidates is how well they actually talk to voters of color about these issues, how they're messaging. Is it real? Does it reflect the reality of their lives? Does it seem sincere? Are they using trusted messengers? And are they doing the outreach at all? Because we know that typically voters of color who are they do vote, but they vote in lower numbers. They typically don't get targeted by the outreach and connection that candidates make. So they're much less likely to get outreach and to be asked to vote and to be talked to about these important issues that are relevant that could sway them, right, when it comes to the ballot box, not just for a candidate, for voting, period.
Well, Mindy, we like numbers here at Bloomberg, and the research that you're bringing us shows some real context here. 3 states that you point out among the swing states. Arizona, let's go back to 2020. 850,000 voters of color did not cast a ballot. Remembering, margin of victory was just over 10,000 votes. Florida, voters of color. That's right. 2.2 million in Florida did not cast a ballot, 6 times larger than the vote margin of victory. Georgia, more than 1 million did not vote in 2020, more than 100 times the margin of victory in the state. The voters are there, Mindy. How do the campaigns then reach them?
You're absolutely right? And they can have an impact for either party. It's an opportunity for either party, and certainly at the state and local level as well. They need to be mobilized. They feel disconnected often, those who aren't voting, from the political process. The case needs to be made for why they should participate, why it matters, and they need to trust that the candidate and the party, right, that their act of voting is actually going to make a difference in their communities. So the candidates need to first start with just actually doing the outreach, moving beyond the typical likely voter models that often leave out communities of color. And the outreach needs to be sincere. It needs to be sustained. It needs to be what we call deep contact, which is not coming in a week before the election or 2 weeks or a month, but starting earlier, knocking at the door, texts and phone calls and social media, of course, but still good old-fashioned knocking at the door works for everybody. Coming inside, talking to the around the table, coming back again, repeatedly making a relationship, making the case for not just your candidate, but for voting period over time.
I also want to point out that Joe just cited among the statistics for the state of Florida, and you also look at the state of Texas here. Mindy, is this a suggestion that those are actually states that we could consider battlegrounds depending on the mobilization of these demographic groups? If more of these voters turn out, do Democrats stand a chance of winning in those states?
Well, again, I just want to emphasize, because this is a nonpartisan study, right, and we're a nonpartisan research center, we think that these are opportunities for both candidates. And the fact that we've moved the conversation away from Florida, which of course for a long time was considered to be a swing state, we're looking at voting patterns of those who vote, but we need to still recognize that there are a lot, as you just said, millions of non-voters that could be quite consequential in the presidential race if mobilized, if we change these patterns of outreach and mobilization. So they could be consequential on both ends. Both parties, I want to emphasize, have historically done a bad job in Florida and other states, right, in terms of reaching out. And that shows now in the change in Florida in terms of the Democratic chances. But also it means that, Republicans have made some progress, but certainly not nearly where they could have, to the degree that they could have made if they had a much larger mobilization effort across the board for voters of color. So it's an opportunity for both candidates, both parties that they've been failing at. And it really comes down to, I just want to make sure that we understand that this is about, of course, having a representative, robust democracy. And right now, currently, and really has always been the case, if we look at the pie of voters in the United States, they're not representative overall of the eligible voter population. And everybody loses out in that, not just swing states and affecting a presidential race. And that's just important to remember.